Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first webinar as part of the Global Evaluation series. My name is Lavanya and I work at Good Business Lab. Ankita, if we can just move to the next slide. Great. So, as I mentioned, this is our first webinar as part of the Global Evaluation Week. The topic for today is worker voice, using technology to drive cultural change in garment manufacturing industry. Global Evaluation Week is a platform for evaluation, knowledge sharing, and networking events. Their goal is to promote evidence-based policy making and improve development outcomes. This is the second year we are partnering with them, and yeah, we're very excited and we hope to continue partnering with them in the future. Before I go into the lineup we have for today, I want to give you all a quick overview of our work at GBL. Zooming out, the present scenario is somewhat like this. The dominant narrative is that businesses take care of business well, but spending on worker well-being is considered more as philanthropy, charity, is done out of compliance, and still does not lie at the heart of business strategy, which is why we believe at GBL that worker well-being programs are not being scaled up and their business potential is not being realized. And the need of the hour is to change business attitude towards worker well-being programs. So the natural question arises, how can we do it? So Ankita, if we can move to the next one. So we do it at GBL through rigorous research on the effects of these worker well-being programs and by building a business case around it, so firms see it as an important investment. Our research shows that investing in worker well-being programs can be profitable, both socially and economically. So Good Business Lab, sorry, Ankita, I think we're on the wrong slide. If we can just go to the previous one first. Yes. Thank you. Sorry about these coordination issues. Good Business Lab is a not-for-profit labor innovation organization. We design, test, and scale interventions using scientific research methods to build a business case for investing in worker well-being programs and to let evidence guide key decision-making. We started our journey in June 2013 with Shahi Exports, who also incubated us, and we're currently conducting in-depth research on worker well-being programs in garment manufacturing in India. Last year, we expanded our work to Latin America with partners such as Toyota and McDonald's. So our mission and our scope is by no means limited to India or garment manufacturing. Today, GBL has 4 focus areas within which we conduct our research, and presented here is a list of these focus areas and our broader aim within each. So the first one is called Unlocking Female Labor, where our aim is to enable women to engage in paid work and firms to reach untapped labor. And this becomes pertinent in the context of India because of the declining female labor force participation. The second focus area is around closing the skill gap, where our goal is to train workers most effectively in the skills that they need to thrive in the workplace, whether these are soft skills, technical skills. And our third focus area is around improving the work environment, which is where the conversation around worker voice is situated. And the goal is to provide an amicable and more conducive environment for workers on the factory floor. And our last focus area is around building holistic health outcomes. So we want to safeguard workers against any kind of stressors to their mental health or their physical health. Cool. So today's webinar topic is, as I mentioned, worker voice, using technology to drive cultural change in garment manufacturing industry. We'll deep dive into this. And before we do that, of course, the big picture question that comes up is, what does giving workers a voice mean? Especially in a high pressure garment production environment where majority of the workers are female, majority of their supervisors are male, where we know that this power imbalance manifests in the form of abuse and harassment. So how can we enable workers to communicate their grievances, their suggestions in a trusted and transparent way? In 2018, in collaboration with our supplier partner Shahi Exports, a clothing brand called The Children's Place, a technology solution developer called WOVO by Labor Solutions, we conducted a randomized control trial evaluation of an SMS-based worker communication tool. This happened in two Shahi factories and covered around 7,500 workers. We found that encouragement to use the tool reduced absenteeism by 3 to 4%. So, this unique collaboration between a brand, a supplier, a technology solution company, and an evaluation organization offers multiple perspectives and underscores the need for worker voice for these different stakeholders. So, through this webinar, we hope to offer insight into how evaluations, alignment across organizations on sustainability priorities, and technology can be leveraged to increase transparency and accountability within a factory setting. And further, we hope to address challenges such as low digital literacy among workers and the need for buy in from all stakeholders involved, including workers, management, and factory owners. We have three speakers today with us. We're very excited to have them from Labor Solutions, GBL, and Shahi Exports. And before I give it over to them, just some house rules. If you are on our Zoom call, please turn off your video, keep yourself on mute. Introduce yourself in the chat box. We do want to say hi and get to know you. We'll have about 30 minutes for a collaborative presentation where the speakers together will go over the different aspects of the WOVO evaluation. Then we'll have about 15 minutes for my questions and then 25 minutes for audience Q&A. Please post your questions as YouTube comments if you're on our YouTube live or in the Zoom question box. We'll aim for around 2 questions per speaker. Great. So this is our wonderful lineup today. We have Elena Fanjul-Debnam, who's the CEO of Labor Solutions. We have Gauri Sharma, who's an organizational development manager at Shahi Exports. And we have Smit Gade, who's senior data and research manager at GBL. So over to you all.
Hi, thanks. I'm Elena Fanjul-Debnam. I'm the CEO of Labor Solutions. And I'll just introduce Labor Solutions. I'm so glad that you guys have been able to join us and we can have this conversation. It's been such an exciting project. I think as pointed out already, such a unique combination of organizations, not just working together, but proactively working together and quite interested in the topic and the results. So Labor Solutions has been around since 2013. And we really focus on how technology can help improve the well-being of workers, mostly in manufacturing and mining environments throughout the world. We operate in over 20 countries and 17 languages. We operate in 18 countries and 17 languages and serve over 1 million workers globally. Our work ranges from what we're going to talk about today, WOVO, to a ton of other kind of things that you've heard about in this space before, like worker surveys, focus group discussions, and then a lot of e-learning. So we're really excited to join. Thank you for having us.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. It's nice to see some familiar names in the attendee list. Just as an introduction, I'm representing Shahi Exports, and Shahi is India's largest apparel manufacturer. So we have 65 apparel manufacturing factories and 3 processing mills or textile mills. And with that, we have a workforce of over 100,000 full-time employees. Like Lavanya mentioned, majority of them are female. And Shahi is actually a contract manufacturer for over 50 global brands and retailers. And I represent the organizational development team. Just to give you some context, this is a specialized team within Shahi, and we are focused on worker well-being and sustainability, strategy and change management. And we almost function like an internal consultancy. So we work across departments, across factories, all the way from HR to compliance to environment. And that's how we kind of create programs, policy, implement them. And I'll talk more about our motivation and how we worked on this really exciting collaboration. But from a Shahi perspective, as you can see, our scale is quite large, and we were interested to explore how we can supplement traditional methods of communication at the factory level with more advanced technology, which could enable us to create transparency and at a corporate level, kind of understand what are the workers' experiences and challenges at the factory level, which, as you can see with the scale, can be quite challenging. Over to Smith to give kind of an introduction of why this topic is so important from an academic perspective.
Hi everyone. So thanks for coming to this webinar. And I would just want to go back to 1970s and look at how people have been thinking about this overall literature. And one of the things, the seminal work with Albert Hirschman looks at exit, voice, loyalty, and how they essentially interact with each other, right? And the key idea, one of the key ideas of that work is voice can impact exit decisions of workers along with other decisions and their well-being in the factories. And before this, the prominent thinking in various social sciences, for example, economics, was exit is the prominent reaction if a quality of the product deteriorates. For example, if you're buying a product, you don't like it, you usually switch to other supplier rather than kind of raising complaint, like writing to the small number written somewhere at the back of the product, raising complaint that this product doesn't work, right? Compare that to political science, where, for example, voice was treated as predominant reaction to deteriorating quality. It's very kind of there right now, where the protests erupting across various countries over kind of government services failing to do what they want to do, right? And you see the kind of the various aspects here where it's very easy exit in product, but if you are thinking about a government service, right? Government providing different things to the citizens, it's very difficult. Exit is a very difficult choice. So voice becomes a natural choice there. But if you come to the firms, you see both the things playing out, right? A lot of people quit firms, but also raise a lot of grievances and ask for things to change in the firm, right? So Albert Hirschman's idea was to kind of bring that and show how these things interplay. Can we move to next slide? Yeah. So the worker, let's concentrate a bit on worker voice here. So there's a definition from his book, but I think the main thing here is just to focus on something that you raise to change to the management or the people who are in power to kind of change things or kind of express your discontent. And that's the major kind of theme behind worker voice here. And that's what we are looking at. Now, if you think worker voice, there we can break it into multiple things. Probably two major things that have been discussed is kind of collective voice and individual voice. Freeman and Madoff kind of discussed one of the major thing that they brought to forth was unions as kind of form of collective voice and how that can act as an agent of change for firms, factories where we are concentrating at the moment, right? So that's one of the form of worker voice. Similarly, Advar et al. Kind of studies surveys as a form of worker voice, where workers' feedback can act as a form of voice. Similarly, current scenario again is a lot of people at Google and Facebook are protesting firms' decisions, right? It's essentially workers in the firms trying to kind of represent the disagreement, the strategy of the firm, right? So collective decision making within firm where workers play a key role is form of worker voice. And one of the other voices kind of communication or grievance redressal with workers. So these are different, they sometimes overlap. Kind of unions can act as grievance redressal mechanism. So that could be kind of where individual as well as collective action can come together. But here we're treating this as just individual grievance redressal mechanism. So there are, this work by Hirschman has kind of spurned thousands of academic work there, right? But a lot of this has been based on survey of workers, and that kind of brings us core to what we do at GBL is to do rigorous research. And a lot of this work is difficult to kind of pinpoint what is the causality. For example, even if you find the exit rate is lower in the firm which has higher voice, the thing to pinpoint whether there's low exit in this firm because there is more voiced workers in that firm, or is it just because the firm has been good, the exit of workers is lower, as well as voice is a facility that work environment provides, right? So pinning this causality has been very hard in the literature, but recently a lot of new studies have started using new microdata, for example, Twitter, Amazon reviews, to kind of do quasi experimental work where you use some features of the data to kind of get at this causality. But again, it's also Dam and Advaryu's first work on this was one of the first study to kind of test this hypothesis in real world setting. And this is again conducted at Shahi Export. And just to explain the context a bit, so a lot of garment workers are minimum wage workers. So their salary is dependent on state policies and how state decides minimum wage. States usually change minimum wage every year. And so at that point of time, a lot of firms observe a lot of attrition of workers. So workers wait to see how much rise is there, wage is rising, and a lot of workers quit after that, right? So this is a very opportune time to kind of test this thing of would voice kind of interact or mediate some of the exit decisions of workers. So what they do is kind of they do a randomized control trial where randomly selected workers got to kind of answer a feedback survey on their job condition, supervisor performance, or overall job satisfaction. And we find the workers who got this survey, they their quit rates were reduced by 20%, right? Much stark result. So these results are driven by the workers who are most disappointed by the wage hike. So this shows this kind of tool of surveys or kind of giving feedback is kind of venting out of the workers in some ways, and just to show that that voice has somewhat of instrumental, has inherent value. Can you move to the next slide? Yeah, so this study focused on kind of inherent value of voice, just kind of where workers can just tell their management that we are unhappy with how things are, and that itself shows some effect. But again, this study has a limitation that this study did not provide an instrumental value, right? The worker voice, one of the major feature is if you raise voice, things would change, right? This study has this limitation. So that comes to our kind of GBL's involvement with this project, where we were very excited where we heard about WOVO, an opportunity to evaluate tool which would kind of provide us an evidence of how does the instrumental value will pay out. One of the, I think Elena will discuss this in detail, but one of the things in literature has been why don't worker kind of raise voice has been kind of the fear of retribution, and the anonymity aspect of WOVO was something which we thought would address this issue and provide a nice way to kind of provide an individual level kind of voice, have some characteristics of collective voice, where collective voice kind of shields workers from retribution. So I think that's the kind of background we have. I think we can now move to the next
Thanks, Smit. I think it's really important to understand that background that Smit just gave about what was happening in worker voice and how it was defined by many different people before we started to develop different things and think about it differently. And so we like to actually call it worker dialogue. We think it's really important to focus on the idea that it's not one way, that it's engaging and interacting, and that we can always follow up on what you say. And so WOVO was kind of came out of that space, kind of came out of this notion that brands and factories had a very weird relationship with workers, where brands would ask factories to implement third-party helplines that then would go to the brands directly. The brands didn't know what to do with it. The factories felt like kind of left out of the process, and they were their employees. And so we really set out to design something different. So the product that we implemented at Shahi and then we implement kind of globally is called WOVO. WOVO is a platform that can be used via SMS, our smartphone application, or WeChat, and facilities and employers can decide on their own which components they want. And so the different components that exist are the worker dialogue tools, so the two-way anonymous communication between the employee and the employer. We do worker surveys as well. We have company human resources, which is everything from newsletters and broadcast messages to pay slips and and more information, handbooks, and frequently asked questions and things like that. And then we have worker e-learning tools, so ways for workers to get everything from compliance topics to well-being topics and talk about their emotional and physical well-being. All of that comes into analytics, which is a really interesting part of this project because the transparency component, which Gauri is going to speak to a lot more later, definitely adds a layer of complexity, but also really richness to the whole project. And so WOVO also includes those analytics, and then finally there's advisory services to help you figure out what to do, because the other thing that Gauri and I will talk about is that this isn't easy. It's not a silver bullet. It's not something that fixes everything. So for the Shahi case, we decided to implement just a few pieces of it for a few different reasons. One, for the control trial and wanting to make sure that we really honed in and focused on that communication component. But two, we were only going to launch via SMS with Shahi because it didn't really seem like a great environment for an app at the time. And so in Shahi, it was just anonymous two-way communication, and I'll show you what that looks like. Can you go to the next slide, please? So the way it works is that a worker will send in a message using SMS, whatever SMS provider they use, however they do it from their phone, just like talking to a friend. That message then shows up on the dashboard, as you can see here. Workers can send in voice messages, they can send in text messages, it shows up here. And then the employer is able to manage, sort, and respond to that message. So when can you go to the next slide? So when the employer responds, it goes right back to the worker's phone. It's a case management system, so the same conversation is kind of ongoing, and it can be assigned to different people based on what's happening. And then all of that, again, produces the data. And that data is really important to helping understand where there are challenges, whether that be at a global level and a country specific or at a department level, and really pinpointing where the challenges may be. And I think Gauri has some really great examples of that later about how they use that data to really enact change. So that's the product. I think the next big step of this is, well, now that we have this product, what do we do with it? How do we implement it? And I think it's really important to speak about this as a tool, not a service. So it's quite important to note that WOVO only works when somebody uses it well, right? It's the technology. You know, PowerPoint only works as well as one of you, as we use PowerPoint. And I think Shahi was a great partner in the situation. They were really engaged, but it wasn't easy. And so I think Gauri is going to kind of talk about how it was implemented and how they responded and how they managed all of those things.
Thanks, Elena. Yeah, I think I didn't want to make any assumptions about how much background people who are attending have about the industry. So just really simply, there are some key stakeholders within the industry. Of course, there's the end consumer who is buying the products. There are brands and retailers who are selling the products. And then, of course, there's civil society organizations, which is unions, you know, activists, nonprofits that are kind of pushing the industry to be better, to be more just. And then we have contract manufacturers like Shahi who work closely with brands who produce clothes for them. And brands and manufacturers have a close working relationship where brands, like Elena said, they have their own codes of conduct, they audit factories, and they are actually directly accountable for what happens in their supply chain. So these kinds of tools are valuable definitely for brands, suppliers, and also something that civil society values as well. That's just to give you a broad context of who are like the players in this game. But to give you some context of who are the main stakeholders within Shahi who were working on this pilot. So we have our corporate headquarters, and the OD team that was running this tool is part of the corporate team. So we were kind of project managing this. Every factory has their own management. So there is an HR and production head who are decision makers and key stakeholders, because without them, we actually can't run a tool like this. And then, of course, we have human resource and organizational development teams at the factory level who essentially were running the tool. They were the ones responding to all the grievances, cases, resolving all the complaints, and the OD team was executing the training and awareness part of it. And of course, the most important is the workers for whom this tool was kind of implemented. So this is just to kind of give you a broad context of the different players, because there's communication and relationship management at every level, which is impacted by this. And actually, a few months before we implemented WOVO, there was a really terrible incident in one of our factories, not the pilot factories, but there was a physical altercation between workers in one of our factories. And I think that was a wake-up call for all of us, that even with the best intentions, even if we are prioritizing worker well-being, given our scale and how we are growing rapidly, we need to evolve our worker management communication systems at the same pace. So while the traditional systems work really well, and they have, and we have to continue with them, we respect them, we need to become more smart about how we communicate at every level, all these stakeholders, and how we build transparency so that we're able to kind of detect issues before they turn into bigger problems. So that's just some context before I get into how we implemented it. Next slide, please. Yeah, so Smit is going to talk a bit more about the research design, but basically we had 2 factories as part of this pilot where WOVO was rolled out, and there are 7,500 workers approximately in both these factories. Like I mentioned, we have a centralized OD team that was leading this project. So like Elena mentioned, when a case comes in from a workers, it's a text message, but that lands on a centralized dashboard. So the OD team was managing this dashboard, and based on the nature of the case, we were assigning it to relevant people in the factory. So relevant people as in relevant HR and admin people who are responsible for that. And we were also, of course, in charge of managing this entire partnership. So making sure that the research team is talking to the implementation team, and also WPO and TCP, all of us are talking to each other. A really critical part of this was kind of co-creation and collaboration. So not only did we, of course, have to train the HR team on how to use this tool, because it's essentially a new technology. There's a learning curve, and everyone has to kind of understand how it works technically. But then there was also a lot of new processes that had to be set up to make sure that this tool works effectively. So collaboratively, as you can see in the photo, this is one of our workshop sessions with HR where we kind of sat down and hashed out, okay, how do we bucket these cases? Because when a case comes in, it can be canteen related, it can be compensation related. So we had to come up with appropriate case categories, and then also assign various HR people those relevant case categories. And that had to be aligned with the existing grievance redressal mechanisms in the factory. So we didn't want to create something that overrules an existing system that would burden people who are working on this. So we had to kind of co-create what are the case categories, who's going to work on what, and then also develop new processes in the sense, how do you respond? So when a case comes in, what is the first thing you should say? When should you respond? Like, what is the timeline within which you should respond? When should you close the case? So for example, a lot of times the case would come in, we would need additional information. So someone says, my fan is not working. Which fan? So you kind of have to respond back and ask these questions. And sometimes you don't get a response after that. So you kind of have to dig through these nuances and figure out what is the SOP around that. And then also a critical part was, when do we ask for identity? Because this tool is anonymous, but not all complaints issues can be resolved anonymously. So if someone has a problem with their salary, you need to know their card number, their employee number, or their name to kind of figure out where the issue is. So these were the kinds of things we had to talk through and collaboratively create, very customized for our own organization. Next slide. And so that's kind of the HR and admin part. But the critical part was also, how do we create awareness around this tool? Because like I said, we already have existing channels and we're bringing in this new system. So it was really important that we design the training in the right way. So the training was kind of designed based on a lot of insights that we have just from being on the factory floor, interacting with workers. But then also a lot of it was informed by the baseline survey that GBL did. So like Smith said, even in the survey, we found that one of the reasons why workers hesitate to complain or raise their voice is the fear of retaliation. So we knew that one of the things we have to do in this training is emphasize that this tool is anonymous. So that meant showing a live demo, having someone send a dummy text message and kind of showing them that, look, this text message here in the dashboard, you can't see who sent it. So like really making sure they understand that their name will not appear when they send their message. Similarly, in the baseline survey, we found that 2/5 of the workers don't know how to send an SMS. So in the beginning, that was a bit shocking, but then we made sure we incorporated that in the training. So we had a session where we kind of showed the steps of how to send a message, but then also told workers that, look, if you don't know how to do it, it's perfectly fine. You can ask someone in your family to help you draft the message. And then, of course, clearly explaining the benefits of using the tool. So this is kind of how we designed this training, and it was for half the workers, which was the treatment group that Smith will talk a bit more about. Apart from the training, we also sent broadcast messages. These are kind of reminders. So it's a mass messaging service that WOVO offers. So we had to think about creative messages. Of course, there's if you have any grievances, suggestions, and this is all in the local language. All the communication happening on the tool was in Hindi. Another type of broadcast we sent is that there are over 100 cases that we have received, and these many cases have been resolved. And that was kind of a way to build trust, to show workers that, look, so many workers have already used this tool and so many cases have been resolved. So that's kind of the interaction and awareness of workers. And just to close on the implementation part, one of the key aspects of this collaboration was to, like I said, make sure all the partners were talking to each other regularly. So we had any technical issues, we were in constant contact with WOVO. If TCP had any new ideas, they were kind of sharing that with us. So we had regular progress calls, and I would say pretty open communication. So that kind of helped us navigate this pilot and actually come out with these results. Yeah.
So just to get into details of how we kind of designed this study. So for a randomized control trial, the idea is at its basic level is we divide workers randomly into two groups, treatment group and control group. Here there were multiple issues here. One of the first major issue that we faced is what to do with control group, right? So one of the things that we could do is just restrict access to treatment group so that control workers could not get access or send their complaints. But that was, we thought, ethically not right thing to do. So then what we decided was to go to encouragement design. So in this study, we didn't prevent anyone from registering the complaint, but in the treatment group, the workers from two factories were selected as treatment group and received two sort of encouragement. So one was training about the tool, and then the frequent SMS reminders. The main assumption.
Sorry, Smith, I think you went on mute.
Hey, can you hear me now? Yeah. So the major assumption we make in this kind of study design is that this encouragement are strong enough that there is a sufficient kind of difference in utilization between treatment groups and control groups so that we can identify the impact of this program. So we do kind of see this thing where there is a massive difference between what treatment group workers kind of utilization as well as awareness level compared to control group. The reason why control group could hear about this is the workers work in close proximity, so they could tell, oh, I went to this training, or uh, I went to this training and there's this facility. But we still hope that this thing is much more powerful in treatment group compared to control group. So what are the key results that we find, right? We do find absenteeism in treatment workers reduced by 4.5%. This was a main outcome that we find, and the results are statistically significant. We do find 6% reduction in quit rates of treatment workers, which is one of the main things that we started off. But this result is not kind of statistical significant in all the kind of specifications we use. So this is significant only in one. So we are not emphasizing these results here. But I think for us, even the absenteeism results is a key result. And we don't find any impact on productivity, as well as we conducted a baseline survey before we started intervention and after endline, and we don't find kind of impact of this tool on satisfaction and mental health. So just to give you bit background here is this clearly ties up with what we have been saying, or Lavanya was saying, about worker well-being being good business, where you see these are absenteeism and quit rates is a clear cut issues that businesses deal, not just because they just part of their kind of bottom line, right? So this results kind of ties in with what we have been trying to do about making sure that businesses are aware that if they do this program, they will get some business return. Yeah, I think Gauri will talk more about some of the other results from Shahi perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Smit. So I think these were some results that were really interesting for us at Shahi. So one of the big questions, like I said earlier, was, are workers even going to use this tool? How much is the uptake going to be? And we actually found that in these two factories, we had around 352 cases that were registered in 7 months. And when we compare that to suggestion boxes, which is just basically a box where workers can write a complaint and put it in, there's a significant difference. So that was 40 cases in the same period of time. So clearly there was interest and appetite to use this tool. And we actually had a very wide-ranging list of cases. And surprisingly, the most popular was banking and provident fund related cases, which were just queries of how can I get my checkbook? Why am I not getting my salary message on my number? How do I link my mobile number with my bank account? So lots of like general queries. And of course, there was also grievances around canteen food, hygiene, overtime and wages. So that was very encouraging to see that we were getting all sorts, like the wide range of issues coming up as well. Just to give you some examples of banking, for example, it sounds really simple, but basically we had a lot of queries coming in the beginning where workers were asking for their bank account number. And we were also a bit hesitant to share that information, because the tool is anonymous and we'll have to ask for their identity. And then after we saw that this pattern was coming up, we kind of zoomed out and tried to understand why this is happening. And one of the ideas that the HR team in one of the factories came up with on their own is that maybe we should just start printing their bank account numbers on their pay slips. So across Shahi, we made that change, and then we kind of saw that query was resolved. So it's a simple thing, but it's simple things like this that can kind of ease the burden of workers. Another example of a grievance was on one of the floors in the factory, the cooling system wasn't working as effectively. So the coolers and the fans were not working properly. So we started getting a lot of messages from one section on, either fixing the coolers or installing more coolers. And we saw almost, I think, 10 or 12 different people messaging us at the same time. And that kind of helped us, escalate that within a day and, get the maintenance team in, fix the cooling system, and even install some new systems. So this was an example of how we were able to take rapid action when we could see that many workers had the same issue. So that's just kind of giving you a broad overview of types of cases. And then I know I emphasized a lot on the training and awareness earlier, but I think the results from the study reassured us that yes, training awareness is really important, because the treatment group which received the training and broadcast messages, we saw that they were 84% more aware of the tool, and they were 4 times more likely to use the tool compared with control. So how a factory rolls this tool out, how much awareness they create, the quality of awareness and how they respond to grievances, to be honest, can build trust and then further drive engagement with the tool.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit to that, Gauri, just to say that this is something that we see across the board and all sorts of different factories that we work in. We almost always see that some of the first questions that come in may seem benign or simple. And I think that, again, that's why we talk about it being dialogue, not just voice, not just grievances, that it doesn't really matter what the issue is. If it's an issue that a worker has and you have the answer as the employer, it's your job to respond. And when you respond and you prove that you're willing to respond and you're respectful in your response and something changes because of your response, then workers continue to use the platform, they continue to trust the system and you, and as a result, that trust over and this is something that can be built over a year or longer, right? Results get better and better the longer it's in a facility and the more trust is built through that tool. So I think it's really important not to brush aside what may be perceived as simple or little things that come in the system. I mean, Gauri used the example of toilets, of pay slips or bank accounts, but oftentimes it's things like toilets, and lots of people are like, oh, everybody complains about the toilets are terrible. But if you think about it from a worker's perspective, this is their humanity. It's something that they're using every day. And if you're not willing to make a change over something that simple, why would you be willing to make a change over something much more complicated, or about their rights, or about something else? They need to build that trust. And so answering their questions and showing that is a really, really important part of the trust that has to be built for the system to be effective.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think GBL team also spoke to 15 HR people of the 32 that were running the tool. And they, rated it a 4 in terms of ease of use. And then 50% of them also said that it brought positive change in the work culture, and the rest were more or less saying that the culture has remained the same. And then 50% said that it led to an increase in workload, which is not good. Although we did try to make sure that it's as aligned with the current rules as possible, but here we see room for improvement in terms of just making sure it takes some time. But I think, sorry, Elena, go ahead.
No. I think we see that too. I mean, I think that it's kind of this like double-edged sword, where in some ways you're getting more information than you've ever gotten before. I mean, you just said it was 325 to 40 cases in the same period, that if they were just using a regular grievance box. So you're getting more information than you've ever gotten before. And because you have the ability to follow up and ask more questions and actually sometimes solve these things that you weren't before able to, certainly you're finding out more information. And in the beginning, and because this was such a short pilot, I would characterize the entire pilot as the beginning. In the beginning, that is a lot of work, right? You're really trying to figure out like how do you respond to it, how do you act better. But long term, as you look at it, it's going to make your workload better and your workers more engaged and happier to be there and more likely to contribute to the culture and whatever else you do. But that's a hard piece for people to get, right? You just described how hard it was to implement. And then, people feeling like it's more work, right? We have to really talk about the importance of dialogue, the importance of listening and responding to people as a long-term vision, not just as a short-term thing that's going to make things change immediately.
Great. Thank you for that presentation. I think it's representative of the project itself that 3 of you collaborated on the presentation, and that was true for the project as well. We have some very interesting questions coming in from the audience. And before we dive into that, I do have some questions for the 3 of you. So to begin with, can you all share your key takeaways from this collaboration, what you want the audience to kind of go back thinking about?
I think I can take a first stab in terms of research point of view. I think we do kind of see the importance of worker voice, some of the key things playing out in terms of some evidence of weak evidence, though reduction in attrition, as well as clear evidence of reduction in absenteeism. One key thing to note is this absenteeism that we find is across the board in treatment group, right? So it's not just for the people who use this tool, it's also the people who did not use the tool. So this is everyone is being impacted just being the tool being there. So that's, I think, key takeaway. And then one thing that we realize in terms of the next step, or what we realize is like this is very complicated thing, and then we need to do much more kind of in-depth understanding of this process in terms of how the systems work, how the HR work, just to understand this in better way. So I think one key takeaway was kind of the going to the next step where we understand how the management reaction to it, how the firm level responses are. Because of the design of the experiment, we are unable, because in each of the factories there are half of the workers who are in treatment group and half who are in control group. We're not able, if there is a change in the factory ecosystem, so to speak, then we are not able to measure that. So I think it's very important to kind of measure that part as well.
I can just go next quickly. I think Elena did talk a bit about the key takeaway, and that was broadly the key takeaway for us. So if there are any organizations here that are looking to implement these types of tools, I think when we started off, we were really excited that we have this great tool. But when we started implementing it, we did realize that it's like Elena said, it's not a silver bullet. You kind of have to understand the context of your own organization. Who are the stakeholders, like I described for Shahi, we were thinking about when implementing the tool, really understanding their pain points. There will be people who are not open to something like this because it's change, and people don't like change, people don't like transparency. So it's a lot about having that dialogue. I'm not saying we nailed it and we aced it and everyone was on board, but we did learn that that's important. So talk to HR, understand what are their fears, what what do they want from this tool. So get that constant feedback. I think that was a key takeaway for us. I definitely think we could have done a better job of that as well. And I think one of the key stakeholders that we didn't get to explore, like Smith was saying, was the brand side of things. Because, like I mentioned, there's that relationship between brands and suppliers, and that has various dimensions to it. And this tool, if proactively implemented by a supplier, can really influence that dynamic. And there is room for us to explore in the future what kind of reports and review systems can we create, not just internally, of course, at different levels within the company, but then also how can we share this information with brands so that it aligns with their compliance requirements. It also creates trust, and then yeah, can basically improve that relationship and also make the lives of brands easier. So that's something I just want to emphasize that we would want to explore in the future.
I think I already kind of spoke to it, and I think there's some really interesting questions. So just skip me and go to the next one, and I'd love to answer some of the questions that are coming in.
Cool. Just a quick follow up to that. So how do you all plan to take forward the learnings from this project in your own work?
I think quickly from our side, I mean, I think it was a really interesting process to work so closely with Shahi. It was just a very different experience than we have had with other clients or brands or factories, just because of the nature of the study. And so the different pieces that we worked with, and we have come out with some new suggestions to our clients. For example, like creating a WOVO committee so that when you launch it, you have other advocates besides just your HR team. So people who have been trained on it, people who are talking about it, people can help you answer questions, and also people who can almost serve as a committee of people who talk about what do you do. And I think some of these questions that are coming in, what do you do about systematic problems or other things, and they can kind of help with some of these bigger challenges as we try to change a system and of communication within a company. And so that piece was definitely something that we've added because of this project.
Great. Gauri, Smit, do you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, sure. I think how we've taken this forward, of course, there's a webinar tomorrow and my colleague Chitra will be talking about that. But I think there was a question about business case as well in the Q&A. So definitely the business case and the results of the study have convinced the Shahi management that this is definitely something that we should implement. It's created transparency. It clearly has a business benefit. So that is definitely something that's going to happen. And we have developed an in-house tool that has a voice and SMS, and it is being scaled across Shahi. And some of the learnings or just things that we wanted to try out are being done with that tool. It's called Inache. And yeah, so this pilot informed basically our company-wide worker communication strategy.
Great. Yeah, I see some really interesting questions coming in. And just a last question from my side, because I think this is just a part of every conversation we have these days, is how is COVID going to impact any of this, your future plans, or generally, how are you seeing COVID impact the space of worker well-being and social sustainability in general?
So for us, I think it's a really interesting thing. I mean, I'd love to hear how it's impacted from a factory's point of view from Gauri, but what we're hearing from our clients and from potential clients is first and foremost, that it was just so overwhelming, right? Everybody was dealing with an emergency, and that looked different for every factory in every country in every region. And they were fighting fires every day. But now that we start to see people emerge from that, which we are starting to see people emerge from that emergency, we're hearing them all come back out with, oh my God, I'm so glad I had a digital communication tool to speak to my workers. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that I had tools to connect with them when they weren't here and get them back to work faster. And then the other side of people who didn't have them, really for the first time, hearing manufacturers talk about well-being and how important their worker well-being and mental health care is. Like that's those, I've been working in this industry for almost 8 years now, and I've been trying to convince people of worker well-being and mental health for so long. And so to have factories, not brands, factories directly come to us and be like, we got to do something about worker well-being. We got to somehow take care of the mental health care stuff that's going on with their workers and the amount of stress that they're under. And we need a communication system, particularly when they're not here. And so while, it's been really slow for like maybe the last few months as everybody's been dealing with emergencies, I think it's going to be super exciting what happens as we move forward and people finally had the moment where they saw why these kinds of things are important.
Sorry, Smit, you want to speak?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think Elena is absolutely right. I mean, from a Shahi perspective and for a lot of manufacturers, factories were in complete shutdown for almost 40-45 days here in India. And there was, of course, a lot of anxiety at every level. And since we have implemented the tools that I was talking about in a few factories, so we were able to use that to communicate with workers and broadcasts and also answer any queries that they have about salaries, etc. But just like one incident, so one of the factories that implemented WOVO, the factory head, I was talking to him like a month back, and instantly he was just now more than maybe a year ago was like, we really need a really solid communication system across Shahi because physical interaction between HR and workers is going to be difficult, especially in factories that have thousands and thousands of workers. And tools like this are really going to be basically the future of how communication is done. Because earlier we used to hear this narrative that, which I agree with to some sense, is that the traditional methods, worker management committee, suggestion boxes, one-to-one communication, those are the main methods. Technology can support that. And now kind of what I'm hearing is that it's really difficult to have those measures now because you don't want to, of course, risk people's health. So maybe worker voice communication tools can become the primary source of safe communication, even from like just a health perspective.
Yeah, and from research perspective, it's very kind of important to see how this shock to the production system or shocks to factories, the way business are operated daily, changing the norms of kind of interactions have been changing. So just to see how this tool kind of mitigates some of the things, measuring this is important from research perspective.
Great. So the first question I'm going to take is for Elena, which is coming in from our Zoom Q&A. Is there any capacity building / awareness module that's also a part of the app?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different ways to answer that question. We have a huge e-learning component of our app, if that's what you decide to do, and that e-learning always starts with how to use WOVO, but then thereafter, you can add e-learnings for specific compliance standards or well-being standards. So we cover everything from child literacy and how to read with your child at home to worker safety and fire safety. So there's a lot of different capacity things, and it ultimately depends on your facility or your brand and how you want to set it up. But we have, I think, over 150 different courses that are available. And right now we have a ton that are available for free that we worked with Better Work and BSR Her project to develop in response to COVID. So it's a free app. It's called Attune, ATUN. And if you go to attune.app, so attune.app, There's a lot of information about the different types of curriculums, and there'll be continually more developed, and it's completely free. And all of our WOVO clients are also able to access those Attune e-learnings as well through the system.
Okay, great. The next one is coming in from YouTube. Do you have migrant workers who speak different dialects? How do you deal with that? Gauri, I think this is specifically for
Yeah.
Shahi, but I think Smit, you can also definitely add to it.
Yeah.
We've done research on this.
So specifically with this pilot, we majorly, it was in near Delhi, Faridabad. So there was that it's majority Hindi speaking population. So we didn't have that issue with this specific pilot. However, even with Hindi, there were challenges. So it's really difficult to for HR to type their messages back in Hindi. I mean, they're used to typing in English, and oftentimes you would get messages uh, um, in English, but in English characters, but actually in Hindi. So there's like that problem of interpretation. So there are challenges when you look at local languages, but we did insist that the HR team at least try to respond in Hindi, because if you start typing Hindi in English characters, then that leads to like room for misinterpretation or just confusion. So we did not have multiple languages in this particular pilot.
I do want to add to that, though, that there are ways to manage multiple languages. So that was a Shahi choice. And again, like I said, this is a tool, not a service. And so how you decide to answer, how you decide to deal with it, it's each employer to themselves. But the tool itself can do multiple things to help you manage those different languages. It can divide workers into different language groups so that you can send specific messages based on their languages. And it knows that the worker messaging you from this number speaks this language. It is anonymous to what kind of language or text or characters that a worker uses. The only thing that's important is that your computer has that script. So we certainly have had clients who don't have the script or the alphabet that the worker was typing in on their computer, and so they're not able to open the message. But that's something that we're gonna see in places like India, where there's so many different languages that it's impossible for you to have that all. But from a technology point of view, it can support any language that you want.
Yeah, just to add to that, sorry, Smith, you can come in after that. We did have a few cases where we were sending broadcast messages or responses in Hindi, and the workers were not getting it on their phones. So they were seeing boxes, and I think that has something to do with whether they, again, have the script on their phone, whether they are able to receive messages in Hindi. So we would get responses back like, what are you saying? So I mean, there are certain nuances to this, but with some trial, and of course, Elena mentioned, there is on the app and other services, multiple languages are available, but of course, there will be these one-off cases where you kind of have to figure out a way around that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Gauri and Elena have answered. From technology point of view, I think one of the key things that we would want to measure in future is to see how this kind of language difference affects people's communication as well as comprehension. But in this study, we did not have lot of this issue. Like, this was a common issue of people like typing in English but Hindi messages. But don't think that. I think once we roll out this into factories where we have different kind of languages, then it's gonna be tricky issue to measure whether the treatment effect is low or high across different language subgroups.
Okay. Great. So the next question is for Gauri, which is coming in from the Zoom Q&A. Was awareness about workers' rights also a part of the training? And actually, I'll club this with another question that's also for you, which is around work culture change. So how long did it take to see the work culture change?
Okay, so on the first question on workers' rights, I'm trying to recall. So first of all, we had 45 minutes to train workers on just using the tool, how it works. So that's limited time, and we trained almost 4,000 workers. So it's really difficult to, talk about multiple topics in that training. But we did have a segment where we talked about, where we gave them examples of types of things that they can send, not to prime them. We were very careful because we didn't want them to assume that these are the only things you can message about. So you have to make sure you're communicating very clearly in the training.
Yeah.
So we said, sorry.
No, go ahead, sorry.
No. So we had some sample messages that like, okay, if you're facing a problem with your bank account, or if you feel like your colleague or your supervisor is being unfair, here's how you have to frame the message, like give complete information so that we can respond adequately. It wasn't a workers' rights training, but it was examples of things they can send. And actually, interestingly, one of the things we noticed is that we gave an example of a checkbook. So if you don't know how to get your checkbook, it was just an example, and we instantly saw hordes of text checkbook messages coming in within like the next hour. So it wasn't worker rights, but it was examples of cases that they can send. But we try to be very careful that we don't make them think that these are the only things you can send. You can send whatever you feel like.
I think that is a really good point, and something that we've seen happen in other facilities where like they give an example and then everybody uses that example and that's all they talk about. I think that what's really maybe more important to say about this topic is that WOVO or any communication platform is in it of itself not the only answer. This isn't a one answer, one solution, fixes everything kind of thing. There's a whole ecosystem of things that need to be happening at the same time, and they don't necessarily have to be directly related, right? So you can have tons of trainings about compliance or other things. You can do that through WOVO. We have that functionality, but to make sure that a worker is aware of their rights in direct connection to this is, to Gauri's point, could sometimes be very confusing and like lead to a different outcome. But I think most importantly, it is to remember that this is just one small piece. I mean, maybe a big piece, but it is just one piece of a bigger puzzle of lots of other things that need to be happening for this or anything else to be successful in terms of empowering or engaging workers.
So I think one point, as just someone who's outsider to Shahi, is that just how hard it is to do this in terms of, imagine like Shahi or all the manufacturers are intense pressure to kind of deliver their order, where a worker's time is literally the money they make. So in that case, asking them to stop their production for food, like workers have to go in batches, so we need to stop production for 45 minutes. Maybe we use some times from different spaces, but still stopping production and convincing management to kind of, hey, you need to stop this, we are doing this saving, is hard choice, right? So that essentially tells you about the kind of commitment we need from management to do this, because one of the key results we get is this training is important, right? It's not just, if you get that Elena has been telling all along, is it's a tool, it's not a service. So factory management has to kind of take effort to make workers aware, and we did kind of work hard to design this training, as well as then implemented it around 3,500 workers. So that shows like how much effort is required, where we thought, oh, we just need to tell workers about this exists. But then once we start going details, there are so many small points and new points, like what if workers can't read, can't send SMS, that keep coming up. So it's very like, once you start going into nitty gritties of things, you start to realize everything needs a lot of effort and buy-in from a lot of stakeholders.
Yeah, in fact, you preempted a great comment that's come in the chat box, and Elena does talk about how this is one solution. So someone is asking, what about illiterate workers who can't write? And
yeah, so again, this is one solution, right? So this is obviously not the solution for that worker, right? Like it does require that you are able to write to send a text message in. It's something that we've thought a lot about, and that we've done some small things, and I don't know if they kind of reach that demand or not, right? So one of the things we've done is we've added the functionality to add voice messages for both ways, so both the worker and the employer can put voice messages, but that's all within the app. And in our experience, we haven't seen a huge penetration of smartphones with illiterate workers, and so it doesn't, we're not sure that that's going to produce a huge, great results, right? We're not sure that that's going to solve the illiteracy problem. I think you have to constantly have all these different channels in which people can talk to you and communicate with you, and also know that, like, yes, there are illiterate workers, but sometimes they're going home and they're talking to other people and they're using these things and they're working together. So it may not work for everywhere. And I think that's a really important thing to like kind of state. I think somebody else asked, like, and these are kind of connected, I'm sorry, but somebody else asked about smartphone penetration rates and did this work really well in India and things like that. So one of the things that we see as an organization globally, and this was true with Shahi, is the closer you are to a big city, no matter what country you are in, you're more likely to have a smartphone, you're more likely to have data, you're more likely to be literate. Obviously, other countries don't have the same literacy, have different literacy rates than India does, but it's really something that you need to think about in your each individual case. And what it means. You also don't have to have a smartphone to use this, right? You can use text message. And so that's something that a lot of people, every phone has text message. Every phone has that capacity. And so it doesn't mean that you have to have smartphones to use it, or high smartphone penetration rates. And it does mean that as people get smartphones, you already have something in place and they can download the app and do the next step. The final thing that I will say to this, which I think is really important to remember, is just because some people aren't able to use it doesn't mean you shouldn't implement it. There are other people that you're going to reach, and maybe more or less, but there are other people who are going to use it, and everybody needs to find their own way that they feel comfortable having conversations and dialogue with their employer. And this may be one of many things that you do, but don't go, oh, we don't have 100% smartphone penetration rate or 100% literacy rate, so we're not going to implement. That's not going to work, right? Remember that this doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's other things you're doing to reach out and meet other people's needs. So this can help you meet a large population of people and really help you organize and provide transparency that you've never had before. And so I think that's important to kind of balance as you're thinking through what might work for your facility.
Right. In fact, a comment that's coming in from our YouTube live is, can't we have voice message facility in the same tool for illiterate employees? I do want to take that opportunity to plug in our webinar tomorrow, because we will be talking about a tool we've built from the ground up, branded as Inache, which does have calling facility. Yeah, do either of you want to add anything more to this?
I was just going to ask Smit if he wanted to share the baseline stats on smartphone penetration. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think some of the key things that is like important to set in context is around 90% workers said that they had access for phones, and then again remaining 10%, 9% said that they have someone who has phone which they can use at their home, or some of their spouses or family members. So getting phone was not an issue. As Gauri said, 60% people said that they can send SMS. So 40% people were not able to send SMS, and around 45% people have smartphones. So I think gender aspect or gender lens is important, because the smartphone penetration is much higher in male workers in factories compared to female workers. It's around 60-65% in male workers, around 35 to 40% in female workers. One thing, of course, is in a lot of these garment factories, male are much higher in different jobs than female. So you will find them in kind of higher grade jobs than female. So that might kind of answer some of why they have smartphone not, but these are two kind of important aspects to this time. So one of the reason why we didn't want to go with app in these things of this is essentially essentially the access is low in terms of only 40 to 45% people having smartphone, but also we didn't go into detail, but the usage ability to use would be even lower among who have smartphones. So that's why we decided to use a basic facility and not go for a smart.
Great. Okay, there's a question coming in specifically for you, Smit. tell us a bit more about the process of randomized control trials and its importance in investigating the impact of the tool and how the results shape the implementation actions.
So these are multiple questions combined into one. So I think randomized control trial, I think one of the major thing, I think as I mentioned earlier, was to decide how do you kind of differentiate between treatment and control group, and that we try to kind of keep balance between both factories and try to kind of use something where kind of decide which are important factors. So for example, working happens in production line, so we want, and so workers in production line keep together, so we plan or we design in a way that in almost every production line half of people would be in treatment compared to control. Similarly in other departments, try to keep them balanced. So that was the key point. And how does result, I mean, the implement, we have the results from the trial, and now that we are going to use it to kind of build a better study, which I think you will hear about tomorrow. And then that's how it's kind of step by step process where kind of these we see it as a three experiment kind of form the portfolio of projects that we're doing in this space, where first was kind of using survey as worker voice tool, then kind of work WOVO as two-way communication with workers, but kind of at individual levels. And the next one, which Gauri and Lavanya talked about, is kind of swing at factory level response, HR response. So this study results have been greatly helpful us to kind of understand the importance of training, how to do implementation part of this, and what are things we should look out for.
Great. Okay, I'm going to take two more questions. So the next one is, did Shahi share publicly or plans to share publicly findings of this pilot study? It is for Shahi, although I think Smit can answer this.
Yeah, of course. Like we are kind of in midst of finalizing the, so we would have a report which would be kind of more from implementation and practitioners perspective, and that will come out sooner. And I think we will have a link on our website which we have recently revamped, and you should definitely go check out for our other projects. As well as we will have an academic papers, but some of you know that's pretty laborious process, so it's might take some more time to kind of get a working paper out, but definitely we will have both a report out soon which will detail lot more implementation practical challenges, as well we have a uh, academic paper compare like giving more academic flavor on academic results.
Okay, great. Last question for Gauri. I think it's a nice question to end on. Did workers communicate any positive feedback? Example, workers appreciating a quick resolution or acknowledging effort put in by management?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the platform was two-way communication, so that's the best part, right? So, what we tried to do, again, this was something we had in the SOP, was that before you close the complaint, whoever is handling the case on the platform has to say, we have taken XYZ action. Are you satisfied with our action? Unfortunately, oftentimes we wouldn't get a response, so we would wait and close the case. But many times we would, of course, get people saying, yes, thank you, the fan is fixed. Thank you, the light is fixed. Yes, the bathroom is clean now. And even some cases, like, I'm trying to recall off the top of my head. There was one case where we had someone who had put in an application for their promotion, but hadn't heard back. And then they, sent that on WOVO. And that was, some administrative issue because of which there were delays. So again, that was communicated, and I remember that she was really happy because it's something she'd been waiting for a long time. So because there's two-way communication, actually it was my personal experience that you can actually see that the person who you're supporting through the tool is able to respond back and say thank you, or yes, this is great. Or even if they're not satisfied, they can very clearly respond back and say, look, it hasn't been solved and I'm not happy. So that's kind of one of the qualities of it.
Sorry, and another feature that has been recently added is that workers, when they're finished, when a case has been closed, they can they can put thumbs up or thumbs down. We try to keep it simple because, again, as you've heard, it can be very complicated. There's lots of things happening. So it's just thumbs up and thumbs down. They don't have to answer it. And we see that workers often do answer it and then sometimes even send a message to like thank the factory for responding because maybe it's something that hadn't been answered. So again, that kind of goes back to a point that Gauri and I were making earlier about it doesn't matter how big or small the issue is or you perceive it to be, that it's important to listen and respond and be respectful. I think that's another thing. Like we do have factories who sometimes aren't respectful, right? Like they'll just say your question is dumb or, you know, they'll say, we're not answering that question. And that even if you disagree with it, or even if you don't think what they're asking is true or based on what you consider to be facts, it's still important to validate the fact that they have a voice, that they have reached out to you, that they are your employee and they have a question and say, thank you for your question. And then decide what to say. And so that trust and all of that and their response to how you handled it is all about how respectful you are. And I think that's a really important part of you know, I know Shahi put a lot of effort into that respect piece.
Yeah. Actually, I just realized that earlier there was a question on work culture that I didn't answer, and this ties into that because I think the question was how long did it take to change the work culture? I can't say. I don't know if the work culture changed or not. It definitely brought some newness and change in how people work. But this is an important part of the work culture, right? Because that how workers send messages, what kinds of messages they send, how HR responds to that, how does the top management in the company review that, how do suppliers and brands share this information. That's the entire cultural change that's needed to really make this tool work. So not just looking at how many grievances are coming in, but also the quality of the response. That's like the hardest thing to do. Is the quality of the response good enough? Is there respect? Are, you know, cases genuinely being solved? So all of this is part of the cultural change. I can't say how long it takes, but it's a long process, and it's probably always ongoing.
I would also argue, and this, I'm going to tie this into the one last question I see here, is that it depends on where you start, right? So we have some facilities who launch it and something has happened in their past, right? Something has happened in which the factory did not respond well, or somehow something happened, right? That wasn't good. And so it may take that factory a really long time to build that trust up, and it may be through really small things, and it may be through a lot of advocacy work and a lot of promotion and a lot of going out and talking to employees and being like, here's what you should use it and why you should use it. And then the part that Gauri is talking about, right? And then once they do get these messages, then being respectful and responding to them well. And then the next step, which is super important, is following up on it. Right? What are you doing about it? Did you solve it? Did you handle it? Did you just send a message that says, thank you, bye? Or did you do an investigation? Or did you make change because of it? And that piece is super, super important, because you may see that in the short term, people are excited and happy that they have this tool. But if you aren't making change, long term, people are going to stop using it. They're not going to feel engaged. You're not going to see cultural shift. They're going to just say, look, this was another, you know, stupid activity that our employer launched to make them feel better or look better. And I think one of the questions here is like, it is around, while anonymity is important, how do we like collect data and make structural changes, or like to a specific department? And I think Gauri kind of spoke about that, but the data comes out in a way where you can see by demographic group, you can see by department, sometimes by manager, who, you know, where you're getting the most complaints from. And sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes you see if you have a manager where you're having a lot of complaints, that means that they're an open manager who's willing to have conversations with their workers. But then sometimes you may go in and see that it's a really bad thing. And so by having this data that's at an aggregate level, that's allowing you to group together and kind of flag issues, then you can dive deeper in and look at each individual case or message, or even go out there on the line and talk to the workers and find out what's going on. So it can do both the indicative data pieces, but also the investigation if necessary. But again, it all comes down to you as an employer and how you respond and how you use it.
Great. Any last comments from any of you, Smit?
Yeah, I think we had lot of kind of good morning messages coming to the tool, and and lot of messages of just hi, with just checking this tool. When people responded, the worker wanted. I mean, it's one respect in one sense funny, but also kind of tell you about curiosity of workers, as well as then once you respond just to this, the good morning saying, hey, thank you for using this tool, just build trust. That's what Elena and Gauri is talking about. So I think it's a lot more effort. Like you need to be respectful. I think Gauri and team took a lot of effort to kind of tell the HR like how to respond, even if the message didn't make sense. If it was just good morning, I think setting up protocols, this effort is goes long way.
Great. So that's a nice note to end on. Thank you everyone who joined and who stayed on till the very end. It was a very enriching discussion. Our next webinar is tomorrow at the same time. The theme is going beyond research. It's also in collaboration with Global. And tomorrow's webinar will be anchored on a discussion to understand how impact evaluation can be used to make a tangible impact. So we have developed a homegrown worker communication tool, which we've branded as Inache. And this tool, backed by rigorous academic research, is a tangible solution for businesses to implement to achieve both their worker well-being and business outcomes. So we look forward to seeing you tomorrow again. And I would like to give a shout out to the team that's working in the background. Of course, you see my face, you see Smith's face, but there's an entire army of people that's been monitoring the comments and the questions and flagging any issues. So Ankita, Sharan, Shalin, Mansi, Anki, thank you again for all your work. And yeah, see you tomorrow, everybody.